Hello and welcome back to another Science Sunday, where we talk about science on Sundays. Yay! Huzzah! Science! So, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. I'm having a great day. And today, we're going to be talking a little bit about astrobiology, the study of life as a planetary phenomenon. Super fancy way of saying we're going to look at how Earth's life was created and how aliens could exist. So yeah, as I was developing this, I realized this is going to be a lot bigger of a project than I thought it would be. Instead of just one episode, this is probably going to take about 3 episodes to actually completely do everything. So our first step is we're going to talk about what astrobiology is, and basically we'll get, in this episode, through basics of Earth. Anyway, so what is astrobiology, you might be asking? It sounds sci-fi-ish and crazy. Well, it kind of is. It's 2 major parts, really. It's the study of how life occurred and developed on Earth, and then the study of how life could occur on other planets. So it's really easy to study Earth. I mean, we're here, it's right next to us, but it's really hard to look elsewhere. We need to use big fancy telescopes, and even then, a lot of it's kind of theoretical guesswork, which is why the study of how life could occur on other planets, there's a lot of hypotheticals, and we really have to ask ourselves the big question, what is life? Because we are carbon-based life forms. They have hypothesized silica-based life, carbon-based, all these other crazy things. So it's really hard to even say what is life on this planet, because we have weird things that kind of react the same way a living organism would, like a virus or prions. So it's really hard to say what is life and what isn't. But astrobiology is a really broad topic that has to pull in a lot of different factors. So you need to know some stuff on astronomy, biology, biochem, evolution, chemistry, geology, microbiology, physics, engineering, all sorts of stuff. It's crazy. So it's a really big topic that you have to know a lot about to really understand. And I certainly don't understand all that much, but I'm going to try my best from what I've learned. I actually took a really interesting course in college on astrobiology, did some cool projects. It was really neat. So Earth's life was pure luck. We are insanely lucky that we exist. And there's a lot of factors that add up to that luck. So the first thing is water. It's really the biggest driving force for life to occur, at least on Earth. So you have to remember, when we're going to talk about, for this episode, everything's in terms of Earth, not other planets, not other possible life. We'll get into that later. So we have to look at water first. It's really important. It was first probably delivered to Earth via comet as ice. Kind of important because early Earth was really hot and it could never hold water. It would never be able to last. It would just evaporate into the space and be gone. So we had to have it delivered a little after Earth started to cool off a bit. It's very likely that life actually started in water. It's the most likely source of it being able to handle life. The biggest thing is life on Earth, keyword there is Earth, requires water to enable cellular activities and survival. So, you are thirsty. You need water because your cells need water. If they don't have water, they can't make energy, they can't survive, they can't do their thing. So that's really important. The next big thing is the sun. The sun's really important, and we probably put it for granted more than we should. You have to remember, the sun is our heat source, obviously, but it also, because of its composition, 75% hydrogen, 25% helium with little bits of metal in there and whatnot, it gives us a very special range of light. So basically, your visible spectrum, little infrared. It's not terrible, because there are some very powerful stars out there. Remember, the sun is a star. The number of people that don't know that, it's very surprising. But the sun puts out a very particular spectrum that's good for us, and we've evolved to handle that. There are other stars out there that put out a lot of gamma rays. There are stars that pump out a lot of X-rays, things that for us would be bad. There are also stars that don't put out much in terms of heat, and other ones that are way too hot. And so we got very lucky with the sun, especially because of location, the biggest thing in real estate. What you need to pay attention to is the fact that we have what's called the habitable zone. So this little picture here, this is, I guess, us. So there's our sun. And you can see on this side over here, it's way too hot. Over here, it's too cold. Right here is just right. In particular, what that stands for is for water to exist in a either liquid or semi-solid. So something that could be frozen at some points but thaws out at others. So like, the North Pole for us is frozen. But if that ice were to float down towards the equator, it gets nice and warm. So you have to look for planets that are preferably in this zone for life to exist, at least life that we understand. So for us, getting too close to that sun is hot as hell. Water would either just be in the atmosphere or just non-existent entirely because it's way too hot. And stuff further out is too far from the sun. It's not going to be hot enough. So it's going to be way too cold. But staying in this Goldilocks zone will keep us habitable. So we have, just right, got some ice, it can melt, it can be liquid, it's good. So that's what's really important, and that's what's nice about our star. It's not too big, it's not too hot, so we're just far enough away. So we were lucky to get an orbit that far away from the sun. If we were further out, even with the same planet, it would never work. Now, if you change planets, it does the same things. Like this guy, this little bit smaller, well, quite a bit smaller, you could see you can be a little bit closer without burning up or freezing to death. So that's really good, right? So let's skip through there. So yeah, we want to be that Goldilocks, right in the middle. Not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too soft, just right. Another big thing that a lot of people kind of ignore is the moon. It was really important that back in the day, some Mars-sized object smashed into Earth. I mean, it hit hard enough to probably turn the whole place back into liquid, magma, lava stuff, that took a chunk of the Earth and floated back out into space, and now orbits us as the moon. So it's probably like a comet or something like that, crashed into us, popped off, and now orbits us. And it does some really good things. It helps drive the tides, which is, not that big of a deal, but some organisms have to deal with that. But it also acts as a shield. Not a lot of people really realize that, even after they've looked at the moon their entire life, every night, and it looks so cool. So, here's a picture of the moon. This is the side that we will always see, from Earth. This is a photo taken from the other side, the dark side of the moon. Notice all of those little pock marks. Each of these are impacts. Some of these very large impact zones. Even on this side, there's a really big ones. What those are asteroids, meteors, stuff like that. Things that are going to hit Earth. But because this is swinging around Earth, it acts as a shield and picks up all that debris that could be smacking into the planet. Now, we did have a big meteorological event that smashed into Earth. Not meteorological, that'd be weather. No. An actual, meteor that smacked into Earth, killed all the dinosaurs. That would probably cause something maybe bigger than that, but even something like this could be pretty cataclysmic. And the moon has been picking this stuff up for a very long time for us. So, thank you, moon. Thank you for shielding us from all that debris flying up the planet that could kill us all. Thank you. Definitely say thank you. I'm glad it's up there. All right. So if we didn't have the moon, the Earth would be bombarded even more than it already has been by all sorts of objects from space, the meteors, comets, whatnot, that could hit us and could cause extinction-wide events. So we're kind of lucky that we got the moon. It's also very important that we have orbit and rotation. So the Earth rotates, and I didn't know this, the Earth actually rotates on an axis once every 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 seconds. And the Earth is actually slowing down. It's not enough that we should be too worried. It's only 1.7 milliseconds per century for a day. That's not that big of a problem, but that's also why we have things like leap years and all that other stuff. But that's really important that we are spinning in a circle, or spinning on our axis, I suppose. That keeps us from cooking. There are some planets that don't rotate at all, and one side of it, like the moon's a pretty good example. One side is really, 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 really cold because it doesn't get any sunlight, and the other side's really, 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 really hot because it's always getting sunlight. So you have to make sure that you pay attention to that. Well, I mean, the moon does rotate, I suppose. I think it's fixed around us, whatever. But there could be a planet out there that, has a rotation that matches the star that it rotates or orbits around. That one side always gets heat, and that's just not good. You really wouldn't want that. I mean, I suppose you could handle it. You'd have to always live at the equator, basically. But needless to say, we also have that orbiting around the sun. So this helps give us the seasons. It helps with weather patterns, stuff like that. So our orbit's really good, too, because it doesn't bring us in super close, because we could be on an elliptical orbit, which we kind of are. Ours isn't terribly strong, but it could be like a meteor where it slingshots close to the sun. If the Earth got closer to the sun than it already does, we'd probably be way too hot. Or if we traveled further out, we'd be way too cold, and we would be out of that habitable zone. So you need to have a planet that is in that nice Goldilocks area where the orbit stays in the Goldilocks. Now, we've found some planets out there that do stay in the Goldilocks, which is good. But there also have been some that they found that are in that Goldilocks for some time, and then they travel out of it. So if they travel out of it, life is less likely to occur there because things are getting too hot or too cold. We also have that magical ability of these special deliveries back in the day. We were very lucky to have some of these comets come in and bring organic compounds like carbon monoxide, dioxide, water, nitrogen, hydrogen sulfides. If we didn't have those delivered to us via these comets, we wouldn't have any way of making these things ourselves. We wouldn't have ways of picking up carbon. We wouldn't have that nitrogen. We wouldn't have the hydrogen. We wouldn't have building blocks that we would need to make parts to start life. It just wouldn't work that way. So we were very lucky to get comets and whatnot to bring debris to us, to get these organic compounds, to get things going in this first place. Now, early Earth. It's basically cut up into 4 eons. You have the Hadean. I believe that's how all these are pronounced. I'm not the greatest at Latin, so forgive me if I'm butchering these. But we have the Hadean. This was basically the time before rocks formed. Earth was super hot. It was mostly molten lava, magma. I don't know if it really counts as lava, because it's kind of all just a big ball of goo. But yeah, we were bombarded by all sorts of, comets, asteroids, debris from space. It was just way too hot. Nothing was going to happen. But eventually things start cooling off a little bit, and we get into that Archean. This is described basically as the time that there was an absence of oxygen, or free oxygen at least. There could have been oxygen trapped away, but the Archean is the absence of free oxygen. And then we go into the Proteroxic eon, which is when we had the aerobic and multicellular life, which was good, but it was very simple. So very simplistic stuff. And then we moved on to the next stage, the Phanerozoic, which is when we think of now the dinosaurs, mammals, reptiles, all that stuff up until now. So those are the 4 big groups that you have to remember existed. So there was stuff too hot where, no life was ever going to exist. Then we get into the Archean, where we start getting some stuff, the Proteroxic, or however you pronounce it, needless to say. Moving on. So, the oldest life we know of on Earth started in Greenland. This Acalia island banded iron formations. They contained a whole bunch of isotopically light carbon, which is very significant towards showing that there was photosynthetic organisms. So it's not plants at this point, but organisms that could utilize sunlight to alter or put together carbons to form sugars. But this was roughly 3.5 billion years ago. Not hundreds, not thousands, not millions, billion years ago. So super long. But this is also a time when Earth was still pretty hot. So 55 to 85 Celsius for the crazy Americans who don't know science. It's 131 to like 185 Fahrenheit. Way too toasty for most things that we know now. But we have things nowadays that are called thermophiles. So organisms that can handle really high temperatures, really low temperatures, high acids, high salts, all sorts of other crazy things. So they're extremes. So extremophiles. Thermophiles are just for temperature. But extremophiles, they're the ones that can handle all sorts of different crazy conditions. There's even times when Earth was pretty much almost completely frozen. They describe it as like the snowball planet, where an ice age basically has formed enough that almost the planet's completely covered in ice. So there's been some pretty rough times for organisms to make it through, and only things like thermophiles could handle that. So one of the big things that we have to remember, looking at Earth's life, we need carbohydrates. It's the sugar. It's Earth's life's form of energy. So those carbohydrates are basically chains of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen compounds. So those together are what we utilize for energy. Other planets could utilize different forms. So it might not even be carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It could be something completely different. We don't know. But we're just looking at Earth for now. So the first life could have only been really three things. So you have the autotrophs, which are going to be those that use light energy to make those carbohydrates. So that's going to be stuff like algae, cyanobacteria is the most likely. But there's also a possibility of chemoautotrophs. So these are things that use chemicals to make those carbohydrates. So this is going to be stuff that can handle living in deep sea thermal vents and stuff like that. They're going to use other compounds to help them make sugar, basically. But then there's some other possibilities. So there's organisms, used in the loosest sense, that don't need energy. Now, generally, scientists kind of say life, to describe something as a living creature, you kind of have to have it use energy. But we do have things nowadays like viruses. They don't technically use energy, but they're still viable organisms, so to speak. Same thing with things like prions. So there is the possibility that maybe even the first life could have been a basic virus. And that's another whole crazy thing that you could really get into with a lot of depth. But we're not going to, just for the sake of time. Another big thing is DNA. As a biotech, this is one of the biggest things that we could ever dream of as being, science. DNA is the biggest deal we've got. So to realize what it took for DNA to even exist is kind of a big deal, and one of the bigger debates on what came first. So life needed a way to pass information on from generation to generation, and DNA was the answer. So it's chains of nucleotides made up of amino acids could be replicated and passed on to the next group. So that creates our, central dogma that we have now. DNA makes RNA, which makes proteins. So that's good. That's life. But it becomes kind of the question, where did complex molecules like amino acids come from? If organisms were super simple, they wouldn't have necessarily the ability to make amino acids. At least not at the start. But 1953, some really cool experiments showed that they used electrical discharge into water with some of the basic chemical ingredients that make up the amino acids actually was capable of forming amino acids. Now we have to remember early Earth was a pretty volatile place. Weather was crazy. It was nuts. There was probably a lot of lightning, at least we think. We're not 100% sure. There's some debate on that as well. But needless to say, it is possible that something like lightning hit some water that just happened to have the basic chemical ingredients and just so happened to form amino acids, which then could form DNA, which then could help pass on information from generation to generation. And evolution plays a big part in all that, and we can talk about that maybe the next episode. But there's also some question on if meteorites brought in some of these amino acids. It could be possible that these were formed by chance through a bunch of energy during, Big Bang kind of events, or even just stars exploding and whatnot, and those carbons and all that come together just in the right form on that meteorite, and that meteorite just so happened to hit our planet. And that brought some amino acids, which then began the amazing chain that we call life now. But, again, debatable. We don't have time machines, so we don't really know. Someday, maybe. I hope. That'd be really cool. I'd love to know the real answer. But anyway, so lightning gave us those amino acids, possibly, which gave us DNA. But there's a bunch of other hypotheses out there. So the RNA First hypothesis is the idea that early life needed to encode genetic information and be able to catalyze biochemical reactions. So DNA and protein and stuff like that, they can't really do that. They need an intermediate step. They need, DNA to RNA to protein or enzyme. But we do have things where RNA can do this. So things like the ribozymes, they're pieces of RNA that are capable of acting like an enzyme. So there's some pretty good hypotheses. RNA might have been the first form of, genetic material, basically, to be able to pass on and do things, just because there wouldn't be an intermediate step. And simpler is usually more likely, especially in the case of early life. This also suggests that life could have started as like an RNA virus kind of organism. So that, again, brings back the idea that maybe a virus was the first critter, or maybe a prion, which, again, comes down to there's other hypotheses. There's a lipid first, there's a protein first models. There's all sorts of evidence, but it's really hard to say because you can't really see much in terms of fossil records or anything like that. It's hard to study something like those that would just be broken down and turned into other things over time. So yeah, we don't have much evidence either way, and usually we kind of assume that DNA would be the way to go because that's what we have now, but DNA is also what's been evolved. So it could have started out as RNA first, then for better long-term storage of genetic information, we've evolved DNA to help play in the long-term storage, but who knows? It's kind of hard to tell. Now, cells had to form too. I mean, that's what everything's made of now, basically, is cells. Cells are just vesicles of fatty acid formed to create membranes. There's a lot of evidence that might say that clay might have actually helped with this, because clay actually increases the rate at which vesicles can be formed. If you don't know what a vesicle is, you should look it up. It's a lipid bilayer, where it's trying to exclude water from the inside, but keep water on the inside and the outside. Needless to say, look them up. We can talk about that in a different episode, but that's basically how they were formed. And these membranes may have formed by chance around things like DNA or those cool RNAs that we were talking about, just by chance, and created what we would count as a primitive cell. And this would give DNA the advantage. When it's inside that membrane, it's protected from harsh environments. It's not being bombarded by so much UV light. It's not getting hit by, a little bit of acid, a little bit of base. It's a little bit more protected, which gives it an advantage. So it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship, or it becomes one kind of, because that bubble is protecting the DNA, and eventually that DNA starts learning how to make and repair that bubble. So it was good evolutionarily wise to be inside that membrane. Now we have some other cool things like the mitochondria and the chloroplast. These are really big events that happen. Both of these are organelles I'm sure you've seen in your high school biology. They're basically the energy source that we utilize now, but they probably were their own organism at some point. So there's a lot of evidence that suggests that, because they have their own genome. It's separate from the host DNA. It replicates independently. They have their own membrane. They can make their own energy. They have a 70S size ribosome, which is similar more to bacteria, even though these are things inside eukaryotes like us, which have 80S ribosomes. They also have things like circular DNA, which is more like bacteria, not us. So they were likely their own thing. And what probably happened was they're their own living creature floating around in the soup, and some other cell with a big chunk of DNA floated over and was like, hey, this thing's got energy, let's eat it, so that we can take its energy. So it engulfed it, pulled it in, and then realized this is a good thing. It's like having your own power plant, so you should probably keep this. This gives you a big advantage over everything else. You don't necessarily have to try and find energy or make it yourself. You can now have these little mitochondria or chloroplasts make it for you. So it became a symbiotic relationship where we are kind of helping protect them with, the big, another membrane. We help pump out chemicals, bring chemicals in, move around, all that stuff. So they've kind of just become our little buddies. And that's a big event. That really was, because now we have things that we're now getting bigger and bigger organisms, bigger cells. So let's talk about a little bit about each of those eons that we were talking about. So we have that Archean. So 3.8 or 3.9, this GA stands for like a giga annual or something like that. It means a billion years. So 3.8 billion years ago was the first time we were talking about that evidence of biological carbons that we were mentioning before from Greenland. 3.5 billion years ago, we first have our stromatolites. These are things that are formed by cyanobacteria, which means we're starting to get photosynthetic organisms. So that was really the first time that we can say that was happening. All that CO2 in the air was being turned into O2, which was kind of a big deal. 3.2, we start getting filamentous fossils near hydrothermal vents. So that means we have those chemoautotrophs starting to produce their own energy. 2.8, we start getting biological methane, which means we're getting archaea and bacteria, which was another big leap forward. 2.77, we start getting biologic or biomarkers for cyanobacteria, eukarya like us, and things like heterotrophic bacteria, so stuff that is eating others that are making energy. So, like us eating other things. We're heterotrophs. And then 2.6 billion years ago, you start getting carbon isotopes indicating things are coming onto land. So that was a really huge step forward. Not just, the idea of a fish getting legs and climbing onto land, but things like cyanobacteria is moving onto land and maybe evolving more towards plants today. So that was a really, really big step. And then we get into the Proterozoic eon, where 2.45, we start getting oxygen atmosphere. So that was a really big, big deal. Especially for the most part, they attribute most of that oxygen to cyanobacteria, not plants, cyanobacteria, which aren't really a bacteria. They're not really plants. They're like a weird in-between critter. It's weird. 2.1 billion years ago is the oldest fossil of a modern morph of cyanobacteria, which is a big deal. It's what we kind of consider as a cyanobacteria. Then 1.87, we get the oldest eukaryotic macrofossil, which means the first eukaryote we know of is this Grypania. It's like Spirilium, I think, or something like that. They make these weird fossils like this. So this is the oldest eukaryote we really know of. This is 1.87 billion years ago. It wasn't anything crazy at all. It really wasn't. They were just little clumps of stringy cells. That's all it really was at the time. I mean, what more could you ask? We started out simple, people. Come on. And then at 1.2, we start getting the oldest multicellular photosynthetic organisms, or eukaryotes, with the modern morphs. So we start getting the red algae. Multicellular was a big step, too. It wasn't just single cells. Now we're clumps of cells. At 0.8 billion years ago, we start getting fossilized amoeba. We're getting fungi, multicellular algae. And then at 0.6 billion years ago, we start getting what we consider animals. So dinosaurs is what's going to start out, but you're going to get, some of the insects. You're going to start getting mammals. You're going to get everything. So that's the first part of life. And like I said, I'm going to have to do probably 2 more episodes to continue this idea on astrobiology, because we had to start first talking about Earth's origins with some very basic detail to see what life was like first, and then what it's going to turn into because of the environmental conditions. So that's going to be the next episode, is the evolution of Earth's organisms. So all the different plants, the mammals, we're not going to talk about everything, but we'll look at some examples and see how the environment, how the physical properties of the planet and the solar system shaped these organisms into what they are on our planet. And then, in the episode after that, we will start coming up with life on other planets. So these ideas of how different conditions could have changed even what Earth organisms would have been like. We'll look into that a little bit and just kind of hypothesize new planets. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this first installment of this 3-part Science Sunday series that exploded into a much bigger thing than I had originally planned. But it's a very complex topic that you have to start at some of the very basic fundamentals that we just talked about. These very simple things that, show how lucky we were to have us exist. Even this planet to exist. So we're going to build on that in the next episode, and then we'll build on that even further with some crazy hypothetical life on other planets. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you had a good time. I certainly did, doing some of the research for this and looking up different things and concepts, and I hope you guys come back to the next episode. We'll talk about how organisms designed on our planet, and then design organisms on other planets. So, hope to see you guys again. Remember, hit the like button if you enjoyed. Leave me a comment. Let me know how you feel on how I did, and if there was anything you'd like to see change, or even just new topics for after I do the astrobiology thing. Let me know what you guys are interested in and want to know. Remember, any science topic is in the field that I will try. Like I said, I'm not much of a chemist, I'm not much of a physicist, but I will certainly try my best. So yeah, hit that like button, leave me a comment, and don't forget to subscribe so that you get an update every time we come up with these, because I'm going to do one every Sunday. So anywho, hope you guys had fun. I certainly did. And remember, stay in trouble. Bye-bye.